Hello everyone, my name is Marita from Croatia, and today I will present you my solution to the 11th problem Yeast. The text stated to investigate the rate of multiplication of yeast at different temperatures, which I've done by changing four different temperatures over the course of 12 hours, then measuring and then comparing the results. So yeast are single-celled fungi, and when they are provided sugar and oxygen, they produce carbon dioxide, water, and it also gives them energy to grow and multiply by budding. So budding is a way of reproduction in which a parent cell produces a bud, which then grows attached, as shown in image 1, grows attached to the parent's body, and eventually disconnects and lives as an independent cell. They're expected to grow at different rates and speeds at different temperatures, which is what my experiment is testing. So when the cells grow in a culture, they go through 5 different phases. The first phase is the lag phase, when the number of multiple cells is not big enough for it in order to be in the exponential phase. Then goes the exponential phase, when the growth rate is the largest. Then is the declining relative growth phase, when the growth slows down. Then we go into the stationary phase, when there is no more multiplications. And the last phase, because of the lack of nutrients, the cells start to die. In our experiment, we're testing, and we're looking only at the first, second, and third phase, and for the highest temperature, the beginning of the 4th phase. In this formula, you can see the dependence of population and time. By this formula, we can calculate the number of individuals in the population in each specific given time period. So P of T shows the population time after counting, T shows, of course, the time, R is the growth rate coefficient for each one of my environments, K is the maximum achievable population in the environment, and A is what represents edge cases. So, for my hypothesis, I said the number of cells definitely will increase over time, that they will multiply the most over the first 6 hours. I said that our results will in fact be consistent with the population model we showed. For the 4th hypothesis, we said that they will start to multiply quicker at high temperatures, and for our last one, of our investigated temperature range, the most optimal will be 30 degrees Celsius. So when we were preparing the yeast mixture, prior to that we disinfected the waters in order to kill the bacteria, which is done by boiling and cooling the water, so that could not have affected our research. We dissolved 5 grams of white granulated sugar in 50 milliliters of water, which was the temperature of the multiplicating environment. So if we were testing at 30 degrees, already the water was at 30 degrees. Then we added 0.05 grams of yeast. So we were measuring and mixing every 2 hours over the time of 12 hours, which is 7 times in total, immediately after mixing, and then every 2 hours. We were mixing every 2 hours, then taking 1 milliliter for each one of our triplicates, because we had triplicates for our experiment. We were freezing it immediately to stop the multiplication process. And repeated this every 2 hours. In this picture, you can see my prepared 1 milliliter containers prior to freezing the yeast cells. For counting cells, we were using a hemosimeter, which is a microscope slide similar to a regular glass slide. It only has engraved lines that create chambers that fit the exact amounts of liquid. So it is possible to count the number of cells in a specific volume of fluid. So of course, we were counting at 4 different temperatures, 5, 11, 20, and 30 degrees Celsius over the course of 12 hours. For each one of my time points, I had 3 triplicates, and for each one, I counted 3 squares on this specific hemosimeter shown in the picture. So that meant that I had 9 squares for each time point for each temperature. After counting cells, I can calculate the concentration of each cells by dividing the number of cells in one square and the volume that was present in this square. In this case, it was 0.04 cubic milliliters. For my first hypothesis, the number of cells increased over time, we look at concentration of cells at different temperatures over time, as shown in this graph. We can see the number of cells increased by 88 for the lowest temperature to 152% of their original count for the highest temperature, therefore proving my first hypothesis. For the second one, we can calculate what percentage of the whole achievable population was in fact achieved already in the first 6 hours by using this formula we already shown. We can see that of the maximum achievable population, 41 to 98% of the whole achievable population was in fact achieved already in the first 6 hours. So my hypothesis is confirmed for temperatures higher than 11 degrees Celsius, but for lower, the multiplication wasn't enough to confirm my hypothesis. For the third one, that they will be consistent with the already shown population model, we can look at the correlation factor between our results and the population model. Correlation for all my temperatures was 0.99, which meant that it was close enough for us to say that our results correlated with the model. For our fourth one, hypothesis, we look at concentration of cells at different temperatures in time, and then we can calculate, we can see that low temperatures, their multiplication is slower and more distributed over the time of 12 hours, and for higher temperatures, growth starts much faster and then tends to stagnate, as for temperatures 20 and 30 degrees. Therefore, we can prove our fourth hypothesis. For our fifth hypothesis, we said that the larger multiplication rate of our investigated temperature range, so of the temperatures we investigated, will be at 30 degrees Celsius. From this graphic, which again shows the concentration of cells over time, we can see the number of cells increased the most at 20 degrees Celsius, but the multiplication happened the fastest at 30 degrees Celsius, therefore showing the growth rate was in fact the highest at this temperature, which can therefore prove our fifth and last hypothesis that the largest multiplication rate will be at our temperature of 30 degrees Celsius. On this graphic, you can see how the concentration grows in time. So this is how growth rate changes for each of one of my specific temperatures. So from the formula we already showed, we can calculate this. At that formula, from that formula, we can get this formula, which is shown down here. So by proving that our results were in fact consistent with the population model, we can calculate this growth rate, which is then visible from this graph, proving that our rate was definitely the highest in the first time for 30 degrees Celsius. In our conclusions, we can see the number of cells definitely increased over time by 88 to 150% of the original count, proving my first hypothesis. We can see that they multiplied the most in the first 6 hours, that our correlation was 0.99, therefore proving our third hypothesis that it will be consistent with the model. For our fourth hypothesis, we can say that that definitely started to multiply quicker in a larger rates at high temperatures, and for our last one, the largest multiplication rate was in fact at our highest temperatures. This was the literature I've used. Thank you for your attention. We choose this for because from the literature, we read that they multiply the most. There are some optimal multiplying times, and then there are some in which they don't multiply that much. So we chose those 5 temperatures because we thought that the difference between them was definitely the largest and the most visible for our experiments.
So you mentioned optimal temperatures. Which of the 4 temperatures that you chose was the optimal temperature for your yeast?
The number of cells was the largest in 20 degrees after some time, but those high results were definitely achieved the fastest for the 30 degrees, so the rate was the largest at that.
Thank you. And then also for the budding of the yeast, are there multiple types of budding for your yeast, or is there only one type?
So budding is one way of production, but aside from budding, there are also other ways of multiplicating.
So how did you mix your solutions? How did you add the yeast? Did you add the water to the yeast mixture afterwards? Or?
So the water was at the temperature of measuring, then we dissolved the sugar. We made sure that the sugar was dissolved enough, then added yeast, and then mixed the mixture dry.
Okay. So it was a consistent stirring of the mixture?
Yes.
Okay. And then what type of yeast did you use?
We used a Belarus yeast, which is Saccharomyces cerevisiae. We used granulated yeast, which we found that dissolves much faster in the water than the yeast which is compressed and already not dehydrated.
And for the sugar, how much sugar did you add and what type of sugar was it?
I showed this in the presentation. It was 5 grams of white granulated sugar.
Why did you choose 5 grams?
We've done some research prior to that, and we must make sure not to overfeed the yeast too fast and to add enough nutrients for the concentration of yeast to feed. So that could have been changed, but we found that the most optimal one is 5 grams of white granule sugar.
Thank you. And then just relating back to my budding question, do you believe that there are multiple types of budding that your yeast could have performed, and if so, did that?
Multiple types of budding.
Yes.
No.
So, what type of budding was it then?
So budding, which we can show in this graph, is basically when the parent creates a bud and then grows attached to the parent's body and then eventually disconnects. This is the only type of budding that was
Yes,
present.
but do you know what type of budding it is? Or is there only one type?
This is the one type.
Okay, thank you.
Hello, my name is Marita. I'm from Switzerland. I'll be opposing problem 11, Yeast.
Press the button.
So the task state, this is what the task states. I won't read it again. But for my interpretation, I thought it was important to look at the rate of multiplication of the yeast, as well as different types of yeast, and of course the different temperatures it's tested at. So her introduction of the problem was clear, and I was able to understand how she interpreted the problem. Her phenomenon, again, was very clear. However, her theoretical explanation was a little uncertain at times, and she hadn't mentioned the budding properties of yeast. Her setup was slightly unclear, and she didn't have, I wasn't able to track what ingredients she used and the amounts. For her experiments, while there were pretty good experiments, I feel that the temperatures could have been tested slightly more. And for her comparison, again, I think the temperatures were very important and she could have tested around the ideal conditions. And for her conclusions, some research to back it up and relations back to her theory would have been helpful. So for her theory, she did not mention different types of budding of the yeast and implied that there was only one type of budding as shown on her graphs. And she also didn't mention that she tested in ideal conditions and the ideal temperature for her yeast. For the calculation of her population, this was really clear, and she had a setup in her first few slides of what the graph should look like, and she was able to relate back to this in her results. Her prediction was also clear of what should happen, and again, she related back to this in her conclusion. However, the types of yeast and the effect that the temperature would have was slightly unclear. For her experiments, she tested 4 experiments and 6 different time points. However, it would have been nice to see different temperatures around the ideal time point, around the ideal temperature conditions, and how impacting this temperature and increasing it or decreasing it around the temperature would have had a bigger impact. For her stirring, again, for her setup, there could have been inconsistencies depending on how you stirred it. As well as this, the freezing of yeast was unclear why you chose to do it and how it would have impacted the yeast. For the last graph, the error bars weren't explained, but that was also partially because of the time constraints. And there was no direct comparison to the ideal temperature of the yeast and why you chose these temperatures. So for the discussion topics, I think it would be important to talk about the temperatures, the freezing of the yeast, and why you chose these, and whether or not testing higher temperatures than 30 would have had a big impact on it, as well as this for the results, talking about your trend and why there was a decline would be interesting. And lastly, for the budding, whether or not there are different types of budding and how this would have impacted the results if there are. So I'd like to move on to the discussion, please.
Okay, let's first of all thank the opponent for the opposition. Discussion.
So if you don't mind, I'd like to start on the temperatures. So can you just explain once more why you chose these temperatures and what the ideal temperature for the yeast that you chose was?
So I chose 4 different temperatures, which I found that will have distinctly different results, so we can compare them. I chose those temperatures because from the literature I found some most optimal, and I wanted to test the differences between those temperatures, so this is why I chose those temperatures. And freezing?
Well, just for the temperatures once more. So the optimal temperature was 30 degrees, correct?
The rate of multiplication was largest, so the multiplication was the fastest. So if you want fast results, it is the most optimal. But if you want the most cells, then the 20 degrees over 12 hours was one of the highest amounts.
Yes. So if you were to test temperatures higher than 30 degrees Celsius, what impact do you believe there would be on the yeast?
So although I did not test this in my experiment, most of the literature states that the optimal temperature is between 20 and 30. So I think that the my multiplication rate will be larger, but the number will not significantly increase than my results.
Okay. For your freezing of the yeast, after you tested it, do you think that freezing the yeast could have possibly killed any of the cells or skewed your results in any way?
So no, I chose to freeze them because I wanted to end up to be able to count the exact amount of cells that was at this time point. So by freezing them, I found that freezing the yeast cells, they will not be able to multiply anymore. So freezing is basically chosen to stop the multiplication process.
Yes. And then for the freezing temperature, I'm guessing it was lower than 5, which was your lowest temperature?
Yes,
Okay.
it was.
And then for your results, if you don't mind going back to that slide, I think the one with
Which
the
one?
decline. Yeah, just back to the decline. Back one more. Yeah. So can you explain the decline in this?
So this doesn't show the count of the cells, but show how the concentration grew, and then we can see that the highest growth of concentration, so we can see that for 30 degrees, the growth of concentration was the highest, which meant that the numbers increased the fastest for this specific.
So if the numbers were increasing, then why is there a decline in the graph?
Because this, you can see for 0 to 1, we can see that the concentration growth rate is the largest, so
Yes.
the rate of multiplying is the largest,
Yes.
but then of course it slows down as the nutrients are absorbed.
Okay, and then at the very end, for 30 degrees at 12, is it at 0? Does that mean that it stopped completely?
So although we can't know if it stopped completely, we can see that from my other results, you can see that it already started to stagnate, so the rate of growing is basically very low, which you can see from my prior graphs.
But wouldn't you be able to calculate if it stopped? Because your results using how you measured it, it would show that there's no production anymore?
So we can see that it roughly stagnated. So my numbers for my last 3 time points for these highest temperatures were roughly the same, but we can't know exactly if the number was the maximum population. So we can't know if the growth rate completely stopped.
Okay, thank you. And then for the budding, you mentioned that there was only one type of budding in the yeast, which was what your graph showed. So what is that type of budding then?
So there are a few types of multiplication. And one of my types of multiplication is essentially budding. And budding is, yeast can multiply in different ways, but budding is just one of them, and there are no more types of budding shown here.
So if budding is one of the types of multiplication, what are the other types?
Budding is when the oxygen is provided, and then those are the products. And there are other types as like
Okay, I understand, thank you. And then just back to your graphs once more.
Which one?
Just whatever one has an increase, so that's fine.
Yes.
What is the increase? For example, do the results double over time, or?
So it is actually written here that that results increase by 88 to 152%.
Okay. And this is just because of the type of budding, correct?
No, this is not because of type
Okay.
of budding. This is because the numbers increase.
Okay, thank you very much for the discussion. Thank you. Clarifying questions from reviewer, please.
Thank you for that discussion. So I'd like to ask the reporter, how did you decide to count the squares of the hemocytometer?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
How did you decide which squares to count on the hemocytometer?
So I was, this is a picture of a hemocytometer. I was counting squares in, I was counting 9 squares in total, and I chose them just because I found I wasn't counting them right beside each other, because that might have meant that the concentration was the largest. So to basically minimize the error, I was choosing ones that were a little separated from each other.
Okay. Thank you. So you stated in the discussion that you thought the optimal temperature was around 20 degrees to 30 degrees, but you decided to investigate the temperatures surrounding 5 degrees. Why didn't you decide to investigate the temperatures therefore of above 30 degrees, which you didn't do?
So I just wanted to investigate the lower temperatures to see how they're different from those in literature are stated as optimal temperatures, but I didn't just because of the way I controlled the temperatures, I wasn't able to measure for higher temperatures.
Thank you. So, you've stated as your conclusion that 30 degrees is the optimum temperature. How can you be sure that it isn't, for example, 29 degrees Celsius? Because you have not tested that.
So in fact, in my hypothesis, I said that of my temperatures tested, this is the one with the largest crack. So I didn't test 29 and I can't be sure.
Okay, so this is a yes or no question. Did you use a stain to identify whether the yeast cells were dead or alive?
No.
Okay. So thank you for the review, for the reporter and the opponent for an interesting review, an interesting discussion. I will be the reviewer for this science fight. My name is Matthew Griffiths and I'll be representing Team New Zealand. Okay, so I've already looked at the question, but basically what this is saying is you've got to investigate the rate of multiplication of yeast at different temperatures. Okay, so overall the report it introduced the basic concept of yeast reproduction. This is important as this is effectively the question, what the question is asking for. It introduced a mathematical model, which it then applied to its results, which was very beneficial as this provided a different element to their presentation. It used a fantastic way to count the yeast as this was a direct method. They could count the individual yeast instead of using an indirect method. And in our opinion, it is the reporting site has answered the problem as it stated that they have counted the rate of multiplication. So the opposition clarified on the method of the reporter, which in our opinion which needed to be done as it was not explained in depth in the report. It was the opposition did a good job of questioning the validity of the optimum temperature, as 30 degrees Celsius was the only temperature that around the optimum temperature that they discovered that was the optimum temperature, and we believe that there is no research that the results that they have proven to suggest that it isn't 29 degrees or 28 degrees, and therefore they could not draw valid conclusions. Okay. So in the discussion, the opponent asked why did you choose different temperatures, which was a very good question in our opinion. And so the reporter stated that they simply chose temperatures based on prior literature that they had seen. In our opinion, that this was not a good enough answer, and they could have produced results that were more specific around the 30-degree mark. So in the discussion, the opponent brought up the freezing of the yeast. In our opinion, the report did not state a good enough answer. It said that it would stop growth. In our opinion, this was a sort of irrelevant question, as in our opinion, yeast is not killed, but simply the enzymes slow down, and that is the issue. That is the freezing that affects yeast reproduction. Okay, so finally, the opponent discussed the results of the experiment, and this was, in our opinion, there are a lot of results that were produced, and the validity of them were questioned, which was paramount to the question. In our opinion, the report did not provide a good enough answer. The yeast cells that accounted for deceased or living, this was a point that was missed. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
I'd like to start by saying thank you to the reviewer and the reporter. However, I think your lack of explanation for the choices of your temperatures led to slightly inconclusive results. And while your measurement of the rate of production was clear and well done, and you were able to prove your hypothesis in theory and yield some accurate results, I think your statement on budding was inaccurate, how there's only one type of budding, because there are multiple types of budding within that one type for the yeast. Meaning that your measurements are slightly inaccurate and have possibly led to inconclusive results. So thank you once more to the reviewer and reporter.
Thank you. Concluding remarks of the reporter, please.
Of course, first I'd like to thank both the reviewer for the review of my presentation and the opponent for the opposition of my presentation. I'd like to say that I think that the temperature range that I chose was enough to get accurate results and then to investigate them. You also stated that I didn't show the ratios in my presentation, which I think that I showed clearly enough on the graph. And for the types of budding, I like to say that there are multiple types of reproducing the yeast cells, like injection and by spores, and then comes the budding. But the exactly types of budding I could not have investigated in my research because I only showed the numbers and I didn't look at it how exactly did they bud. So I think that the budding did not affect my research at all. Once again, thank you for the discussion.
Thank you very much. Questions from the jury? Pavel was the first.
I have the question for the reporter. Can you please go to the slide with the statistics of correlation coefficient?